Twains! No other form of transportation seems to be able to capture people's imagination more. From Agatha Christie to Bong Joon-ho, there just seems to be something about trains that captures people's attention. Maybe it's the toots. I don't know. The most interesting thing about trains isn't even the train itself, it's the people that robbed them. That's right, today it's all about train robberies. We'll learn about the most infamous characters to ever hold a 6-shooter and how the train robbery cemented itself in popular culture. Historical context. Steam locomotives first hit the scene around 1804 in the UK. Before then, humans had to rely mainly on animal labor if they were to move just about anything, which worked fine, I guess, except it was terrible. So as soon as trains could demonstrate that they could haul stuff faster than a canal or carriage, the US went mad for them, laying down endless rails in an effort to dominate its frontier. And dominate it did, with over 22,000 miles of track laid down by the 1850s. Fantastic situation if you were the North, who could now exert authority over the land with speed never seen before. Less so if you were a Southern slave owner, not that anybody really cared what they thought, but anyway, up to that point, the South was content to produce its cotton on the backs of its enslaved population till, by their estimation, economic forces would drive plantations to find new methods of cultivating their crop. Sadly, when those economic forces arrived in the form of trains, the South revealed that it had been crossing its fingers the whole time, and began a 5-year-long tantrum that would become known as the American Civil War. Trains would play a vital role in deciding the victor of this war, and it was at this time when thousands of young men became experts in the art of train thievery. Both armies stole from trains. Both armies stole trains from each other. Everybody was stealing trains in those days, and this is when some of the most famous train robbers of history were forged, in this crucible of war that had enveloped the nation. Of course, the North would eventually come out on top, owing much of its success to its extensive rail network, cementing the train in popular imagination as a dastardly mechanism of government control. So now that we're up to speed, let's explore some of the most nefarious train robbers in American history. The Reno Gang. The first organized train robbery that we have any documentation of took place on the night of October 6, 1866 near Seymour, Indiana. This dastardly deed was undertaken by the Reno Gang, a band of outlaw brothers who had made a living during the Civil War as bounty jumpers. Men who repeatedly enlisted and then deserted from both the Union and Confederate armies to cash in on the bonuses for their enlistment. On a cold and rainy night, the Reno Gang boarded a train as it departed from Seymour and made their way to the express car, the cabin at the front of the train which carried most of the valuables on board. The gang quickly overpowered the express employee in charge of guarding the express car and made off with the valuables inside. News of the robbery spread quickly, capturing the nation's attention and inspiring several copycat crimes to follow. This infuriated the company in charge of ensuring the valuables within the express car, so they enlisted the help of the Pinkertons to apprehend the Renos and bring them to justice. Long story short, the Renos were eventually caught, and while awaiting their trial, they would be abducted from their cells by an angry mob and lynched, the mob leaving one noose open to send a message to other outlaws never to attempt a train robbery again. That didn't work. The James Gang. Frank and Jesse James were outlaw gunmen that ran the infamous criminal outfit known as the James Gang. They were at one time embittered guerrilla fighters whose hatred for the North ran deep. And after the South's defeat in the American Civil War, the brother bushwhackers took to a life of crime. These enterprising young men eluded the law for almost 2 decades, and in that time they got to become pretty accomplished train robbers. What set the James Gang apart from other train robbers was their ruthlessness, robbing passengers of their personal belongings and killing anyone foolish enough to try and stop them. Their first train robbery happened on July 21, 1873, by derailing a train as it sped across the Iowa plains, killing several and making off with $1,700 worth of loot. The James Gang would continue its reign of terror well past its first robbery, and would only be brought to an end when Jesse was killed at the hands of the turncoat Robert Ford on April 3, 1882. Henry Loftus and Harry Donaldson. The last major train robbery in the United States occurred on November 24, 1937 by Henry Loftus and Harry Donaldson, two 20-somethings hell-bent on returning America to its Wild West roots. Henry Loftus began his life as a disaffected youngster living in rural Wisconsin, killing time by falling into the stories of the Old West from his favorite cheap novels and dreaming of a life as an outlaw. His family, ever the supportive Midwesterners, fostered his interest in the hopes that he'd eventually grow out of it. However, Henry would not grow out of it. He eventually developed what his family would go on to call a Wild West complex. And when the family moved to Chicago in 1936, Loftus had had enough of the hustle and bustle of modernity and left to seek out what was left of the wild frontier. So Loftus set out, along the way finding a kindred spirit and a fellow Wild West enthusiast named Harry Donaldson. Now a united front, the two hopped aboard a train bound for the West Texas town of El Paso. Upon their arrival, the two were disappointed to find that El Paso was as modern a U.S. city as any other, without so much as a tumbling tumbleweed in sight. This simply would not do. The pair decided that the old West had to be brought back for one last yeehaw. So they bought themselves some fancy cowboy outfits, a six-shooter, and decided to rob a train. On November 24th, 1937, the two would-be outlaws boarded a passenger train on the Southern Pacific Railroad, and an hour into the journey, pulled out the six-shooter and held the conductor and fellow passengers hostage. Things turned ugly basically immediately, eventually ending with one dead passenger and the two would-be outlaws beaten and bloodied. Loftus and Donaldson would plead guilty to second-degree murder and spend the next 50 years of their life behind bars, ending a chapter in American history that began almost 71 years prior with the Reno brothers. Brought to you by ScripTalk, talking prescription labels for the visually impaired.